Speaking of conversing, how about we talk with one of the best quarterbacks BYU's had? His name is Riley Nelson. Love having him on the show, joining us on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline. Riley, thanks for joining us today.
B. Logan Shep, what's up, guys? Thanks for having me on.
You bet.
Nice,
Always
man.
great to talk with you. How are things in the Nelson household? What are you up to these days?
Doing great. Just we had our first son back in October, and his little Lewis he's starting to run around and throw things and squawk a lot. I tell you what, that boy's got a set of vocal cords on him. It won't matter whatever the crowd noise is, his cadence will be able to echo above it. So he's keeping us pretty busy.
So what was lefty or righty?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, undecided yet. He's ambi right now.
Okay, perfect.
What's harder to prepare for, being a parent or a game plan for a football game?
I don't know. I don't know if all parents feel this way. He's been such a good baby and kid, and I get so much more. Like, it's a win every day, so it's not hard to prepare knowing that every day you're going to end up with a win. Now, keep in mind he's only months old. I know they can hit terrible 2s and 3s is a different story, but that being the case, definitely harder to prepare for certain opponents than it is being a dad.
So, Riley, we've been talking this week a lot about leadership and who do we believe can and will be a leader on this year's football team. How would you define what a leader is?
I think a leader would be defined by their characteristics. Top among them, first and foremost, what people have to understand is a leader has to perform on the field. Like, you can't have these there are guys who have a lot of charisma and they're good public speakers and they are hard workers, but if they don't produce between the sidelines on a Saturday, you can't ever be a leader. You could maybe be a leader in like the academic pursuits or the service pursuits, but if you want to be an actual leader on the football team that contributes to success on the football field, you have to produce between the lines. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is most important is consistency. The guys that you are trying to get follow you need to know that they can put their trust that they're going to get the same thing out of you day in, day out in practice. They're going to get the same thing from you on Saturdays, and nobody wants to put their faith in someone who's erratic. They're not sure if he's going to show up on time. They're not sure if he's going to give good effort that day or not. And then the last thing, and this is way down the list of importance, maybe that I would mention or that comes to mind, is you do need a certain element of charisma. There needs to be something inspiring about you. You know, for me, it was interesting. Everyone was always taken aback by how physical I would play the game. Well, I was just brought up. That's how I learned to protect myself. I learned to protect myself by giving a defender a glancing blow off my shoulder, but everyone else said, "Oh, you're lowering your head on the boom." I was never trying to lower my head or truck anybody. I was just trying to get my body into a position to protect myself. But that small little act was something that was inspiring to the players around me. And whatever that form, I'm not saying that it has to be that for a quarterback or any other player, but you do need something about you that inspires the guys around you to raise their level of play.
Riley, where would good hair and abs fall on the list that are important for leaders?
Oh, man, the abs, not all. The hair, I got to admit, the hair was a little bit, everyone wants to feel like a rebel, right? And so when I had that hair peeking out the back of the bottom of the helmet, guys like associated with that, because everyone feels like they're, first of all, nobody is a rebel. The real rebels don't last at BYU, but everybody that sticks around thinks they're, like, B. Logue used to do this with his jewelry in his ears. Yep. You know, he'd try and push the envelope, and we all kind of had our own little thing. So whatever your demonstration of being a rebel was, it did play a little bit into there. But the abs, I got more. That probably hurt my leadership abilities more than anything else.
Riley, man, you're absolutely right. I got my earrings. Actually, I'm looking at them right now. I took them off for air. So yeah, that guys definitely try to push it a little bit. But something that stood out to me, what you said earlier about a leader, just the characteristics. And there's guys, that are good. They produce on the field, and us as players or even coaches, we want them to be more vocal, right? We want them to speak up and say certain things in certain moments. Do you believe that being a leader is something that you're just born with, or can a coach, teach a player like that is maybe a little bit shy, doesn't have the vocal skills, et cetera?
So it's easier if you're born, because like I said, an element of it is charisma and public speaking, things like that. And if you're born not afraid, or if you were raised to be able to embrace those things, obviously it makes the path a lot easier. A kid can be coached, or better phrased, let's put it this way. A kid who might be a little bit more introverted or soft-spoken or shy can assume the position of a leadership role as long as they are willing to maybe overcome those more natural tendencies. Or a coach could also bring a player along that is willing to be brought along. But the bottom line is some guys, like the fear of having to say something in a timeout huddle or at halftime or before a game is so insurmountable that they will just never do it. And that's okay. You got to go down the roster and find the next guy who is willing to do it. But it's a little bit easier if you're born with those, kind of public speaking and charismatic traits. But I definitely am a believer that a guy can develop those. And keep in mind that there are quiet leaders out there, guys who people naturally gravitate to. The speaking and the leading out vocally does play an important role, but I would say it's a less important role than your average fan or the average, sports writer would have you believe.
So with that being said, do you, if you were a coach, right, would you want the coaches to vote and pick who the leaders are, or, would you want the players to do that? Because again, the players may have a different perspective and say this guy produces on the field, but the coaches could say, okay, but this guy produces and, he can speak up.
Yeah, I think leadership has to be chosen by the players on the field. I think coaches, Coach Mendenhall did two things. He had a kind of, I can't remember what we call it, was like a leadership council, and those were players that he chose, that he discussed issues with. But our captains that walked out and led us out of the huddle and walked out to midfield and all those things were chosen by the players. So there was a group chosen by the coaches and a group chosen by the players, and I felt like that was a good happy medium, because the reality is if someone was in that leadership council of Coach Mendenhall's but maybe was not super well liked by the players, it was fine, because their influence was limited to just being interacting with the coaches. Right. Anytime you try and a leadership position has to be earned. It cannot be bestowed. So anytime a coach tries to bestow a leadership position, I have never seen in any athletic arena that be a successful strategy. So I would be more inclined to say it has to be chosen, or the player has to emerge from among his peers rather than being picked by the authority figure and the coaches.
That was deep, man.
That was impressive.
Did you make that up just now, Riley?
You betcha, man. I'm nimble, mentally nimble. Not so much with my feet anymore, but my brain's still sharp.
Riley Nelson, former BYU quarterback, joining us here on BYU Sports Nation. As a former quarterback, do you believe it's imperative that the quarterback of the team is the leader, or at least a leader?
Absolutely. It's the nature of the game. It's the same thing. Why, like in basketball, let's look at Kawhi Leonard and maybe some of the issues that were going on with it. He's a very soft-spoken, introverted guy. He's the best player on the Spurs, and yet there was some resistance there to him assuming that leadership role. Now, in football, your quarterback may not be your best player, but is your most visible player. And so I would say it's a combination of whoever your best and most visible players are, just by, the psychological intricacies of a team. Those two guys they don't have to be the leader, but as you said, Shep, they have to be a leader. I think that's absolutely essential.
So one real quick thing before we let you go, 2 weeks away from the start of camp starting, when would you announce a starting quarterback? Do you wait in order to have the strategic advantage, or do you announce it early to maximize the reps for that guy? We got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, the announcement, there's a difference between announcing and showing, and the announcement absolutely means nothing. Arizona is going to be preparing for Tanner Mangum because he's an upperclassman who has experience, and in most college programs, that's going to be the guy who emerges as a starter as the starting season. And the reality is, as you look at, they have access to high school film on Zach Wilson or film on Bo Hodge. You kind of look at those guys. It's not like they're a Lamar Jackson type player they're going to completely change the offense and is going to be able to absolutely beat you with their legs. So it's going to be a similar scheme. So the announcement means nothing to me. Obviously, you want to start piling on reps on the guy that is going to take that first snap for you. But the bigger advantage comes in the fact that Jeff Grimes is a first-year OC, and he's been on staffs of a pretty widely varied bunch of offenses, and no one's quite sure what mix of those styles will come out. So more so than who's pulling the trigger at quarterback going into this first game, the strategic advantage more lies in nobody's quite sure what to expect out of Jeff Grimes. Right. So I'm excited, and I think that that'll help us going up against a good U of A team.
Riley, great stuff, man. Appreciate you chiming in, and congratulations to the Nelson family on the new little one. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.